All right. Hello, everyone. It's exciting to see so many faces joining us and continuing to filter in. We're going to give it just another minute or so to let some folks in. All right. Well, my name is Mary Furlong-Minkoff, and I am a member of the Orange County African American Historical Society's board. And I've been asked this year to help coordinate our virtual Juneteenth celebration. So some of you may have been able to be with us last week, where we had our kickoff to our virtual event, in which we had our first program, Juneteenth, a homecoming celebration, where we talked about the history of Juneteenth, the experiences of it. And then each week we're going to follow with a different set of panelists, of experts, and follow a different theme. And so our theme this week is Juneteenth, putting the home in homecoming, where we're really going to explore the ideas of home and the power of place. I'm excited, already seeing in the chat, we've got people from as far away as Florida, which is as stormy as Virginia is right now, which is, forgive us all if our internet goes out, and Canada so far. Sarah, good to see you representing Canada again. So I want to take a few minutes to introduce our panelists. We have a really amazing panel of experts joining us today. So I'll start with Terry Miller. Terry is a native of Fort Worth, Texas, who has called Virginia her home since the year 2000. She's the owner of Whisper Meadows Press, a history research and writing firm that has developed a niche in creating museums that focus on economic, military, educational, social, and familial history of African American communities. She's the founding curator of 3 museums: the John J. Wright Educational and Cultural Center Museum in Spotsylvania County, the Dr. Lawrence E. Graves Museum of Dunbar History in Washington, D.C., and the Carver 4-County Museum in Culpeper, Virginia, for which she developed more than 25 traveling, virtual, and in-museum exhibitions since 2017. Before relocating to Virginia, she was a lecturer in political science courses at both the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts, and Wesley College in Wesley, Massachusetts. She holds a BA in political science from Texas Christian University. She spent a year at Oxford University in England, is ABD in comparative politics from Brandeis University, and earned an MBA from the University of Maryland, my alma mater as well. She's the author of 3 books, all published by Arcadia Publishers. And her most recent book in 2019 was African Americans of Culpeper, Orange, Madison, and Rappahannock Counties. Thank you, Terry, for being here. Our next panelist is James Bruce Monroe. Bruce is currently the Orange County African American Historical Society president. He was born and raised in Orange County, Virginia, in the Little Petersburg community. And he's retired after 25 years as a federal employee with the U.S. Department of Defense in aircraft maintenance, as an aircraft maintenance foreman, and also a retired senior master sergeant in the U.S. Air Force after 31 years of service. He currently serves his community not only for the Orange County African American Historical Society, but on the executive committee and political action committee, political action chairperson of the Orange County branch of the NAACP, as deacon and trustee of the Bethel Baptist Church in Orange, Virginia. He's a member of the Orange County Tourism Advisory Committee and the Montpelier Descendants Committee. Bruce graduated from Orange County Public Schools, and he holds an AAS in business from Piedmont Virginia Community College, and is a graduate of the Air University Senior Non-Commissioned Officer Academy. He's also a husband, grandfather, and father. Probably his 3 most important jobs. We also have with us Dr. Matthew Reeves. Matt is now back to being the director of archaeology at James Madison's Montpelier, and a role that he has held since the year 2000. And over the past 2 decades, Matt's research has focused on plantation life, as well as the Civil War encampments, and really focusing on sites relating to the African diaspora. For 3 decades, Matt's focus on public archaeology has centered on citizen science, and in particular, working with descendant communities, as well as other special groups like metal detectorists. He received his doctorate from Syracuse University and currently serves on the board of trustees for the Society of Historical Archaeology and the Florida Public Archaeology Network. We are also joined by Charde Reid, who's a historical archaeology PhD student at William and Mary's Department of Anthropology. Her doctoral research investigates the relationship between archaeological knowledge, production, heritage sites, historical memory, contemporary identities, and restorative justice in the Tidewater, Virginia. Results of Charde's master's thesis research, which explored the complex relationship between making African diaspora history and cultural visible in historic Jamestown, were recently published in the International Journal of Historical Archaeology. Before joining William and Mary's anthropology graduate program, Charde served as the assistant archaeologist of the District of Columbia for 7 years. Her community engaged and interdisciplinary research has previously been recognized with the Mark E. Mack Community Engagement Award in 2016, a District of Columbia Awards of Excellence in Historic Preservation for Community Involvement and Education, and the National Park Service's Appleman Judd Lewis Regional Award for Interdisciplinary Stewardship in 2020. Currently, she's the co-chair of William and Mary's Student Assembly Ad Hoc Committee on Reparations and a member and group advisor for the Lemon Project, a journey of reconciliation undergraduate and graduate student volunteer group, the Lemon Project Society. And it's more people. Everybody keeps joining, which is great. And our last panelist is Jordy Yager. Jordy began working at the Jefferson School of African American Heritage Center in 2017, when he helped launch the African American Oral History Project with local filmmakers Lorenzo Dickerson and Ty Cooper. In 2018, he continued that work with a project grant from the Charlottesville Area Community Foundation to map racist housing policies and corresponding life outcomes for the forthcoming exhibition at the Jefferson School. He's a graduate of Charlottesville High School and earned a BA in Sanskrit and a master's in journalism from Boston University. And for 12 years, he has worked as a daily journalist, primarily focusing on Washington, D.C. and his hometown of Charlottesville, where he focuses on issues of race and equity. So this is our amazing panel of an amazing variety of experiences and knowledges, and I'm so excited to have each of you here joining us right now. So I want to start with a question for the panel, and we're going to kind of really dive into our celebrations theme this year. For this year, OCAHS decided to celebrate Juneteenth around the theme, a homecoming celebration. And so kind of diving into that idea, I'm going to ask of the panel, and I'll kind of go through you all. Why do you think people are drawn to return to their home places? And what does home really mean to you? And because Terry, you are on my screen, I'm going to go to you first.
Thank you. For me, people go home to relax. I'm fortunate enough to still have my parents. They are elderly and still lovely and funny. And so going to Texas to spend time with them is very special for me, because when I enter mom and dad's home, which is my home since I was maybe 13, I know that I can go in, I can go in the fridge and get anything I want. I can sprawl out on the sofa, I can watch the TV, I can giggle with whomever. So I am comfortable at home. And because I only get to go home about once a year, it is really special. So everyone that I genuinely loved first, they are home. Even the graveyard that I go to visit my grandparents and aunts and uncles throughout the state, that for me is home, because I knew I was loved and I loved them. I also understand, though, that not everybody has that experience. Not everybody has a good feeling about where they began. Now, that's really what home means to me. So I'm going to stop and let another one of my panelists hop in now.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Bruce, I'm going to go to you. The hometown boy, what does home mean to you?
Well, homecoming is a very special day in Virginia, and especially in Central Virginia. And a lot of it is tied directly into the churches. I'm one of the last generation of those that grew up during the period of segregation. And there are approximately 20 of these settlements of African Americans, and all of them have a church. Communities were started, and families got together. They started families, built homes, communities, but there was always a church. And each year, and which is still one of our yearly rituals, I guess you would say, is to return home, because during the period of segregation, we had a lot of our young people after high school moving north because of job opportunities and so forth. And each year on a designated day, our churches have a homecoming. And it is a big day in that community, because everyone that have gone off to these other places, they will return home on this special day. Community day, a big church day, and a big celebration. Brings a lot of people into the community, a lot of people into the town. So it's a lot of economic benefits to these days. And they are stretched out from a period from about the beginning of June, and it goes on through the end of September and October. So these homecomings to us in this area of Virginia is a very, very special day with very special meanings.
Thank you so much. All right, sort of staying in the Orange area, or at least folks that live in Orange. Matt, I'm going to go to you. What does home mean to you? What does homecoming mean to you?
Yeah, thanks, Mary. I'd say it's a sense of connection to a place that helps us understand who we are. And at least for me, that is for me. And I think it's a belief in places holding intergenerational experiences that have really built us as people through the connections we have. And the place I've really felt that is not where I grew up, but where my wife Tanya grew up in upstate New York in the Adirondacks. And we've been going to her family's home place for the past 30 years. And I have just loved having my two kids see them get connected with the land and taking them out into the woods and finding old house sites that probably their umpteenth great grandparents knew and had friends at and potentially even lived at. And so that connection, I feel, is I feel that's what draws a lot of people. And it sounds a little mystic, but it's actually scientifically proven that these intergenerational experiences, and some can be good, some can be bad, but they're with us and we feel that connection.
Excellent, thank you. All right, Jordy.
These are wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Excuse me. I think for me, home beckons a sense of responsibility. And so I grew up in Charlottesville. I graduated, as Mary said, from CHS, and promptly moved, as did many of my peers. And some never came back, but I stayed away for probably 15 years. My mom still lived here and still does. And when I would come back to visit, I would always be reconnected and reestablished. But it wasn't until I fully moved back about 15 years years later that I began to actually see what that level of responsibility entailed, because all of my community in various parts, a lot of networks that don't know each other even, showed up for me because I was moving back home. And so whether it was a place to stay, whether it was a job, a chance or a second chance, everybody had something to be able to provide and give and help me kind of make that transition. And then that forced that question of, how often have these kind of gifts, these blessings been bestowed on me unbeknownst to me or unrecognized? And so looking back even further across the span of my whole life, I've started to interrogate and really look at those points of privilege, those points of opportunity, and see that not everybody had those. And so what is my responsibility today as part of my community, as part of the place where I grew up, as part of my home, that that responsibility that falls on me to be able to provide and to assist that opportunity to be created for other people. I think that's really what home is when it comes to my experience.
Excellent, thank you. And last but not least, Charde.
Thank you, and sorry for the internet issues, as Mary warned. Hopefully my phone network will be a little bit more reliable than my Wi-Fi. But as far as home, and especially this idea of home place, it's just theoretically, I've been really influenced by the ideas of bell hooks in particular, but other Black feminist archaeologists, especially people like Whitney Battle Baptiste, right? Where there's this understanding that home is this place of connection, right? Where we create these memories. And for me, that's certainly the DMV area in Northern Virginia, where I was raised and where so many of my family members still call home. I think about the connections that I've created there, not just to place, but right through food and through storytelling. And through different interactions, right, with families and friends. And for us in my family, especially in DC, one of the main events that really sort of contextualizes that for me, one of the things I really think about are the famous crab fries that my Vini family has in DC. And thinking about all the happy and even some tense memories around those big family gatherings like this. So as an archaeologist, right, and the places where I work, these sites that were home places for so many people for generations, that is something that I'm definitely interested and continuing to explore and contend with. And for me in particular, it's really important, as so many of our panelists have already shown through their work and the research that they're doing, that there needs to be connections to both the local and descendant community to really have a really kind of grounded understanding of what home place does mean, right, to these archaeological sites that we're working at.
Excellent, thank you. So I want to ask another question to the whole panel, and if anybody wants to jump in first, be my guest. But I asked the panel, what is a place in Virginia, preferably, that has meaning to you, and why is that place meaningful? So if anybody wants to jump in, or I'll call on you. All right, Bruce, I'm gonna call on you.
I'll weigh in.
Great.
I would have to say the community that I grew up, Little Petersburg in Orange County. It was started around 1867, just after the Emancipation Proclamation, where 3 landowners purchased land from a landowner by the name of Bankhead, who happened to be, his wife was related to Thomas Jefferson. Sold property to 3 African Americans, recently freed. Few years later, sold more acres to those same 3 individuals. They in turn started selling parcels, half acres each, to other freed slaves, started raising families, started a church, a school, and it grew into a community. This community is very special because a lot of the families that live there, most of them are related in some type of way. This area actually, I actually grew up with both sets of grandparents in that community, cousins, all other relatives, and it is a very special place because even prior to emancipation, this is the same land that my ancestors walked through, that I actually spent time with. They were type grandparents that told stories and left traditions. And so there's a lot of memories in Little Petersburg. And not only that, but these people, they cared for one another. They lived off of the land. We had a river for our major resource. It was used for recreation, actually food. People actually lived off the land. So this was a special community where these families actually, I would say, persevered, and they maintained and grew the community and contributed to our society in the building of this country. Little Petersburg is a very special place.
A very special place. And I would also say there's an amazing documentary that Bruce was really integral in making that is available online through the OCAHS website. So if you want to learn more about Little Petersburg, you can find out more. Who wants to go next?
I can go, Mary, because I've got a great picture of you I want to share.
All right, we'll go Matt and then to Terry.
All right. Well, a place that has meaning to me is, in general, is any place in the woods in either the Piedmont or the Tidewater of Virginia. And for me, it's special, you know, because it's coming from my where my head as an archaeologist is when you're in the woods, you're more than likely, you're almost guaranteed to be in a space that one time was fields or agricultural fields. And it's where in so many cases, 99 times out of 100, there were enslaved Americans who cleared that land, and they left clues behind, not just to the work they were doing, but really the ingenuity of understanding the soils, understanding how to successfully have that agricultural occur. And it's in those spaces that we can begin to not just reconcile the history that's been lost of their contributions, but also begin to reconcile the connections that descendants have with those spaces. And that's something that is very special at Montpelier. And the one place that has a huge amount of meaning to me is a place we've been researching for the past 15 years, is the East Woods. And here you can see, if I scoot aside, you can see Mary this was in 2014. You came on a metal detecting expedition, and you can see over on the right here, there's my other right, you can see there's a chimney base here. It's the middle of the woods. And in the survey, what we found was evidence from the metal detector survey of, on one ridge, a tobacco barn, another ridge, a threshing barn. In the bottom areas, we found these drainage trenches that enslaved laborers designed to have the bottomlands be drained for growing tobacco. And they're really, feats of engineering. It's Black engineering. And it's something that, Madison would not have been able to understand to do, but only through the enslaved individuals. So they were doing this engineering, this agricultural work. And this place in particular with the chimney, this was the slave quarter. And it's a place where the folks that knew that land and did the engineering lived. And just like you all are talking about, we're talking about here, this would have had memories that were special, some painful, some joyous. And to imagine how to begin to recover that is just, it makes it an incredibly, it's a beautiful space now, and it's beautiful for the natural environment, but also the information that it holds.
Thank you. All right, Terry, to you.
That was lovely, Matt and Bruce. I like the Booker T. Washington Historic Site. And a word that Matt used earlier was mystic. And there's something about walking the site, imagining it as an old tobacco plantation, 200 plus acres. And, you know, when you work with that crop, it makes your fingers a different color, and which kind of colors your life, and sometimes determines what it is that you're going to do. But there is this boy born on this land, raised by his mom, and working with other people. And he gets some kind of inspiration as well as some kind of imagination and determination. And those three things seem to have their own guideposts. And so when I go there, I feel this mysticism to grow and to keep growing. And it's regardless of how you were born. It is the way that your imagination can kind of take hold and take you in your mind to some place that you want to go. You may not know where that is, okay? But you know you want to use it. So that particular site continuously feeds my imagination to just take the step. And the step will take me somewhere. And if I get good allies like he did, someone will reach out to me and help guide me to where I need to go. So I love that spot. Oh, and it is in, of course, Hardy, Virginia, around that area. It is in Franklin County, which of course, after his death, turns into the biggest bootlegging place in all of Virginia. And so that to me is also this interesting pattern. You have first this almost holy pattern of growth. And then you have something that's completely different that takes on another pattern of growth, but it is behind the curtain. Bootleggers can't be out public. So this one area of land has all these different things going on in it over different periods of time. And so nothing is actually static. Everything is moving and growing in sometimes positive ways, other times negative ways. So I get all of that when I visit that area.
I love that. I love that. Reminding us that place isn't permanent and how it moves and changes. Charde, how's your internet? You ready to go?
Yeah, I'm ready. Yeah, so for me, I'd say especially over the last few years, Fort Monroe has become, in Hampton, Virginia, has become a really important place, not just because of my research, which is a very big part of it, right? Fort Monroe was the site, the location in 1619 that the first Africans who were forcibly brought to English America landed, right? And then were duly purchased by the most elite people in the colony of Virginia. So in that way, Fort Monroe represents this place of beginnings, right? Of the foundational beginnings of Africa America, especially to the families that I've been working with in this region. But it also represents a place where a lot of these ideas about social inequality and difference and race was confronted head on, especially around the Civil War. And the immense amount of contributions that African Americans have made on the site itself through time. And for the last few years, we've actually been working on a memorial space that will hopefully be unveiled in the near future, to actually represent some of this history, right? And to really contend with this 400-year plus location that has in itself so many complexities, so many paradoxes of what it means to be African American, right? And America. So I think Fort Monroe, especially as an archaeologist, there's been so many interesting archaeological excavations that have happened there, but the work that I've been involved with in Jamestown and the work that I'm continuing to do in the Tidewater region is continuing to help tell the story that began at Fort Monroe. So if you haven't been there, I hope to see you all there. There's going to be some Juneteenth events there as well. I don't want to compete with you all here as well, but it's really become this place recently that the local and descendant and research community has really been able to gather and discuss these ideas and kind of transform some of the thinking that we've had about what freedom and unfree right means in Virginia and what it continues to mean in Virginia.
Amazing, thank you. All right, Jordy, bring us home.
So to speak. That's really exciting about Fort Monroe. Oh, wow. I think right now, one of the places that has the most meaning for me is a neighborhood in Charlottesville called Vinegar Hill. So my partner, Lorenzo Dickerson, and I just finished making a film. So we spent the better part of the last year and a half talking to a lot of people about what this neighborhood was like. And it's one of those fates of history where the name Vinegar Hill in my lifetime became synonymous with a place of destruction, of a place that no longer existed. And yet when you talk to people about Vinegar Hill who used to live there or who frequented it, it didn't mean destruction. It meant everything but. It meant every part of life. So it meant going to their church, it meant going to their school, it meant going to their benevolent organizations and societies. This is where they grocery shop, this is where they got their hair cut. It carried every piece and aspect of life within it for almost 100 years. And so as Lorenzo and I are working on this film, we started talking to a lot of people, as I said, and one of them actually is here with us tonight, Cynthia Jones Stratton, who painted such vivid pictures about the sights and the smells and the sounds. She recalls, hearing this music come out of the Blue Diamond. Or the ginger snap cookies when you come into Inge's grocery store. These are still so visceral and so literally on the tip of their tongue that when you talk to them, you can't help but be transported there as a place. And yet when you go through that actual physical space today, it's parking lots, it's hotels, it's, if you've been near the Jefferson School, you've seen it. It is very much transformed and not what it was. And so what we wanted to do with the film was bring people back to that era, to those 100 years, to not have it die a second death. There wasn't a second destruction with the erasure of that first story of its life. And so that's really where, for the last year and a half, I've been transported into that time period. And in many ways, that's where I still am. And so that's where I find the most meaning in terms of place right now.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you also for setting us beautifully up for the next line of discussion. So we talked about some places, some that are, memorialized or commemorated by being national parks, like the Booker T. Washington Memorial Site or Fort Monroe, these very large sites that have kind of a public memory to them. And then some other sites that have experienced some of this erasure, as Jordy was talking about Vinegar Hill, or as you saw the site behind Matt, when all that's left of it is physically that people can see is a chimney. So I want to talk a little bit about these sites that have been erased or forgotten and that need to be remembered or re-remembered. and how we should represent these sort of forgotten places so we can continue to celebrate them today. So does anybody want to kind of jump in about how they think we should be talking about these places that may have been intentionally erased, maybe forgotten about, or being remembered or re-remembered, or possibly even just forgotten about by some people, but always remembered by others, and ideas of how to celebrate them. Oh, excellent. And someone just put up a link to Jordy's film in the chat. So good job. All right, Charde, you want to hop in?
Yeah, I can start first because I
Great.
sort of wrote an article that sort of talked about this in a way. Again, kind of just looking at some of the research I did at Jamestown for many years, especially surrounding the Jim Crow era of interpretation, when sites like Jamestown were becoming sort of these national symbols. The Black presence was really purposefully ignored and erased, right? Not only was Jamestown a place that had people of African descent living there from the 1620s on, it's also was a majority Black place, right? Home site, home place throughout the 18th and 19th century. But that story for many years was undertold or completely ignored. And sometimes, right, as we are having these conversations today, in the wake of 2020, right, and the uprisings, we see why, right, some of these stories have been purposefully ignored and uncomfortable to re-talk about. Some of the debates that we're having right now in Virginia around critical race theory, I think highlights this for many of us. But I think there are a lot of ways now that especially activists and communities, people who have lived in these places for generations and continue to tell these stories right through to their children and their grandchildren. We as archaeologists are beginning to partner and to think about ways that we can actually collaborate meaningfully to tell these stories. And just to plug just some of the great work that you all have been doing, right? And that has been so influential to a lot of our work and a lot of the work that I know I'm definitely doing. The rubric is, I think, a really great way for so many sites now that are trying to, bring these stories into light again, can begin to address them meaningfully. Because we do risk, I'm so excited so many people want to tell these stories now, but we do risk telling them in a superficial way or telling them in a way that is not full engagement. So I hope that, yes, I just saw a link to the rubric, and I would say that's been what has shown so many of us, especially who work at heritage sites, museums, etc., how to even just begin the conversation, because I think for a lot of folks, that can be the hardest part.
Excellent, thanks, Charde. Does anybody want to jump in next? Terry? Yeah.
Two quick things. I work with a site. This is the George Washington Carver Regional High School that was forgotten and closed and just dormant for many, many, many years. And then the alumni were able to lobby the local governments to bring it back to life. And if that had not occurred, the building would be like so many others. It would be torn down, all of that. So that particular school was the first, and I believe the largest regional high school in Virginia, because it housed or it educated students from 4 counties: Culpeper, Orange, Madison, and Rappahannock. Built, of course, in 47, opened in October 48, and existed through integration. And that's a whole other story. But that place was the hub of the African American community, simply because you always had your religious institutions. You always had those, but there were many of them. There was only one high school that everybody went to. So they had an opportunity to meet new people, make new friends, build alliances, share stories, and all of those things that made a larger regional community. And that is what has been the glue that has kept this going, and actually was instrumental in revitalizing that school. And it's also about the naming of it, because when the school closed after integration, the county changed its name. And so we're like, no, no, no. And even getting it to its original name of George Washington Carver was done by those who advocated for the school, because the administrators, when the school was being built, had decided on a name. And the advocates, meaning the parents and members of those local churches who had been working for many years for a high school for their students, decided, no, you don't get to choose our name for our students. You don't care about us anyway. We will choose our own name. And they chose the name of George Washington Carver. And so that has now been promised to be returned to the building. We will soon have the official name put back on the building that was taken off after integration. Number two, and very quickly, as an added piece of information, the Spanish were on what is now US soil as far back as the 1500s, and particularly in St. Augustine, Florida, and Galveston, Texas. There were Africans brought to those areas, and they had communities of their own as well. One particular gentleman was a translator who went all through the Gulf states, helping to translate with Native Americans, and his name is Esteban. So just the idea of place, and Galveston means something to me, because that is also where Juneteenth, as we know it, the date, that is where General Order Number 3 was read from, letting the Texas slaves know that they were now free.
Thank you. All right, Bruce or Matt or Jordy, Matt, I see your hand up.
Yeah, when you sent us these questions, Mary, that you talked about remembering, and you had added an apostrophe there, and it reminded me of our first descendant reunion that we did at Montpelier in 2001, and it was titled "Remembering Montpelier," and that really stuck with me, because for two reasons. One is that as an archaeologist, when we find sites, and like Charde was talking about, we do the archaeology and we find the clues, and we remember those sites. We bring them back together, the pieces, and form a story. And a lot of times we can help preserve those by putting up a sign, or maybe an interpretive kiosk. But really, the remembering of those on a higher level is remembering them with descendants, and reconciling that loss of memory of the landscape of these sites with descendants whose ancestors created and knew these sites so intimately, and to have the landscape, these landscapes of memory devices, what the Montpelier descendant community calls it, is using this landscape to bring those memories back, and to use descendants to remember these spaces. And so it's an interesting, complex way of looking at remember, which is, the physical, no one can remember some of these sites because that memory is gone, but you can remember those sites with the physical aspects that, makes home place so powerful, that connection to that land, and really use that as these spots as spots of reconciliation. They have so much power for descendants.
Absolutely. Bruce or Jordy, would you like to add?
I'll jump in. I would mention our special project that we are dedicating next week on the 19th of this month. We will be dedicating a commemorative park in the town of Orange. And this park is representative of the African-American section of Orange County. For over 100 years, it was segregated, and African-Americans lived in an industrial area or a commercial district, I should say. And it also served as a residential area, Black-owned businesses. And what was so important about it was that it connected to all of these other African-American settlements throughout the county. I would say more than 20. And it was customary for on Saturdays that all of these people from these little communities, they would come into the town, maybe visit the barber shop, the beauty salon, shopping, and African-Americans, Blacks, they own these businesses. And all of these little communities had connections, personal connections. And most of these connections were made through education or through the school system, because the fact that you only had this one school, you actually had people coming out from the other counties visiting Orange, because that, it was a very active center of activity in Orange County, especially during the 1960s. And the area was eliminated in the late 60s, early 70s, because of a bypass that ran through that area, and they removed more than 25 residential homes, and it ended that community. Some residents or some families are still there, but we are going to recognize that community for its contribution to the growth and the economy of Orange, the town, and the county. Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you. Right. Jordy.
That's amazing. Wow. Yeah, so June 19th, right?
Yep. Join us in downtown Orange.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the thing that comes to mind for me is a series of projects that Dr. Andrea Douglas is the executive director at the Jefferson School African American Heritage Center, and together we've been kind of working with members of the community and local videographers and oral historians to collect a series of recollections and remembrances about neighborhoods as people grew up in them in the surrounding Charlottesville and Albemarle area. Those are being added to a already robust collection of interviews that go back to the early 1980s, that people's memory at that point was stretching to the early 20th century. And so adding on to that, we recently got a grant from the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the Saving Places program, as well as the Institute for Museum and Library Services, that together with those two grants, we're going to be able to build the first comprehensive data set for Black property ownership and rentership So the public directories, the telephone books were often segregated. And so we can actually pull out entire decades of history where people were living, and often it lists where they were working too, what their employment was. And so that is for the residential portion, but we also have a series of 400,000 pages of property records for the city and the county that we've digitized, and we're able to start mapping, so that within the African American Heritage Center, there will be this repository for those oral histories to have an actual legal breadcrumb trail of where families owned land, how neighborhoods evolved, where Black contractors, Black architects, Black designers, where they were building homes, where they were building businesses, all throughout Charlottesville. As we have it now, it's a little bit scattershot. It's based on people's recollections, which is always a little bit imperfect. And so we're adding to that already growing repository of oral histories with that comprehensive, just land analysis and land bank. And with that, I think it opens the door for a lot of possibility with regards to remembering of land that, quite often we will approach somebody and say, did you know your great grandmother used to own a home on 3rd Street? Or on William Street, and they had no idea, because that neighborhood is completely transformed and is a faint glimmer of what it used to be during their great grandmother's lifetime. And so with that data set, we're able to look at and really close the gap at how displacement has affected families, as well as arming families who are in danger of being displaced today with data sets and record collections that are then able to kind of stem the tide of gentrification, as it were. And so we're really excited. That's going to take us into the next probably 2 or 3 years, but it's really I think it's going to lend itself to a number of different possibilities in how we tell stories and the types of stories we tell about African American history here.
Thank you. Well, one of the things I was really struck by listening to you all talk about this, and Terry mentioned the importance of names and getting the name of the school and getting the name on the building, and being struck by the place names that we have used in this conversation. And I was wondering if anybody wanted to share or elaborate a little bit more on either the history of one of the names of one of the places or the importance of place names, as we've been talking really about this power of place here. I'm seeing you nod, Charde, so I'm going to call on you.
I need to stop being so expressive because I'm constantly that student being called on first. But yes, place name is so important for so many things, both right. We're sort of talking about tangible and intangible heritage here, right? And as archaeologists, what we have mainly focused on a lot is tangible history and things like artifacts, right? And remains of old buildings. But one of the projects that I've been working on recently, I am a proud board of directors member of the African American Historical Society of Newport News, who I collaborate with on my dissertation research taking place at Fort Eustis in Newport News, Virginia. But part of that project has led us to create our, or got me involved with helping create a oral history program and also a place naming program for the massive amount of what is it called? Redevelopment that's happening, and especially in the downtown area. So something like place names or renaming has become so very important. And one of the concerns of some of the community members that I work with is this tradition, right, to name especially sort of these higher profile renamings after national figures like MLK or Lincoln, right? In particular, there's a park called King Lincoln Park. But historically, and to many of the folks who live in this community who are of African descent, that place has always been known as Pinkett's Beach. And that is a really important thing because Pinkett himself was an African-American landowner, businessman who had a very famous son who was in a jazz band. And he actually had this plot of land and along the water in Newport News, right? Water is another such an important thing to many Black communities in Virginia, right? And this site in particular, especially during Jim Crow, gave the Black community locally a place where they could come and have recreation, to have baptisms, right? There were these big revivals that would happen at this site. And sort of now placing this large national kind of figure name on this site, which in many ways, right, would seem to be a great thing to recognize it. But in that way, it's erasing this person who had so much importance to this community. So again, right, these are decisions that are sometimes made at a higher level, sometimes by us as archaeologists, but a lot of times by even higher than us, the people who are making, right, the big level decisions. And again, how can our work actually sort of emphasize these names that are continuing to be erased? And again, hearing what Jordy's doing is really exciting, because I think there's so much information that, especially in these directories that now I'm going to have to take a look at, that we could be really using, especially when these downtown places are being reimagined and being gentrified.
Absolutely, thank you. Anybody else want to talk a little bit about place names or naming?
I'll just say,
oh yeah, Jordy, go ahead.
Just real quick. One of the things that, as we're going through property records, that is so alarming and shouldn't be surprising, but just is evidence of how, entrenched this history is just how many plantation names are now sites of subdevelopments and subdivisions, right? That I mean, the list is growing and one recently, there's the Shops at Stonefield, which is just north of Charlottesville on Hydraulic and 29. Stonefield was a plantation. Rugby was a plantation. Belmont, where I live, was a plantation. Willoughby, which is a neighborhood where my film partner Lorenzo lives, that's the name of a plantation. So it's everywhere. And one of the things that I think has long been the dream of many of my friends who are descendants of people who were enslaved here is to see that level of engagement that everybody here is describing on that localized level, right? So that it's looking back through farm logs and deed records, looking back through wills and all of the resources that, the paper trail that is there, to try to piece together those family stories that are right in front of us, but may not rise to the level of Monticello or the University of Virginia, but whereby thousands and thousands and thousands of people were enslaved. So just seeing how evident that is in place names is always just very striking to me.
I'm never gonna go to the shops in Stonefield and see them the same way again. And I think that really captures how important names are as a way of erasing or remembering or re-remembering.
Yeah.
So I want to.
Oh, and can I just say one last thing? I think also thinking of how we're naming sites. So now at Jamestown, a plantation is about to be excavated, and we are working with the community there to think about ways of naming the site that does not valorize the name of the plantation owner, right? Because again, so many of those names are also carrying on through the work that we do as well as archaeologists.
Matt, I'm going to push you into this. Can you talk a little bit about the changing names of the building that has been known as the South Kitchen, the Boyhood Home, the Planter's Cottage? Yes. And could you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that encapsulates this conversation really well.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mary. For at Montpelier, as many of you all know, we recently did archaeology and did a reconstruction of the buildings in the South Yard. And one of the buildings is one that wasn't recorded on an insurance map from 1837. And from the archaeology, we were able to figure out that it was most likely a kitchen in the 18 teens and 20s. And when one of the descendants of Montpelier, Betty Keir, started looking at her family history and started visiting Montpelier, she felt a special connection to that place because one of her ancestors, Corinne, was enslaved as the cook during the time period when that kitchen was standing. And so, you know, fast forward several years, and when we did the archaeology on that building, we were able to figure out that it was initially built not as a kitchen, but as the original home for the second generation of Madison's, James Madison Sr. and Nellie Conway Madison and their children, and likely enslaved house servants as well. And so there was a move at that time to call it the boyhood home of James Madison. And that was very upsetting for Betty because it erased her history of it being the kitchen, her ancestors' home. And so we, Betty and staff pushed to have this that be called the South Kitchen, because that's the period of restoration that we've restored it to, and to preserve that history and connection with the descendant community, not just with the enslaved community, but more so the descendant community who have that strong memory. And this was even more reinforced by the presence of a carnelian ring that we found that matched up some of the oral history that Betty had, which was just absolutely amazing. So yeah, there's a lot of power in naming. So, and oral history is another way to capture that.
Absolutely. Bruce, is there any thoughts on naming?
I do think that in the future, we will be losing the names of a lot of these communities throughout Orange County. Communities that were formerly settlements of free slaves. And over years, these the families, they raise their children, they send them off. They raise their families in other places, and these communities are now becoming, the homes are becoming vacant. And the families are losing homes at a fast pace. A lot of them because of tax purposes and people not being able to maintain homes in two different locations. So these small communities are shrinking, and families are losing ownership of these properties that have been held for over 100 years by African-American families. So you will see the names of places like Tibbtown, Freetown, all of these other little communities, they will disappear unless something is done to preserve these names. So that's just a thought. Now they do have African-American descendants, but this is only for a short time in the future. So we are going to have to preserve these names.
Absolutely. And Terry, I'm going to go to you. Your comment is what inspired this line of conversation. So if there's anything you want to say to kind of bring us together with this idea of the importance of names and naming of places.
When something has an original name, you can always go back and find that, all right? It is in some record somewhere, even if it is in a church bulletin that your grandmother or great-grandmother kept in a drawer or a box. So the importance then becomes oral history. And even though memory is movable. There is something in what someone tells you, what they may have remembered, that you can always trace back and find. Now, we're going to, I've really been struggling with this because we are going to have to, at some point, be able to name both things. And the reason is that everybody wants to be noticed for something. And where I live, I'm in the Holland area of Tidewater. There were lots of discussions about statues and neighborhood stoop map here. And we have been able to come to some kind of agreement that both things are important. The Nat Turner rebellion happened near here. And of course, everybody wanted to completely erase the name of Nat Turner. Well, you can't do that. It occurred, all right? You can cut down the tree that he was hung on, but everybody knows where it was, all right? So people had to come to terms with the fact that these things do exist, period. Name it what you want, but make sure that both things are recognized, because everybody has some kind of contribution to make. And not everybody is all good and not everybody's all bad.
Thank you. Well, I want to take this opportunity to see if there's any questions for the audience. You can feel free to put them in the chat and I can read them, or you can raise your virtual hand and I can unmute you if you have any questions from the audience. Keep thinking about it. Well, one question I do have for everyone while our audience is thinking of things is, we are doing this program as part of a celebration of Juneteenth. So I'm going to ask you the same question I'm going to ask every panelist. What does Juneteenth mean to you? What does that mean to you? And I think, Terry, because you went last, I'm going to have you go first this time.
Very briefly, Juneteenth means I am a Texan, and we get to share this holiday with all the country now. And I think that's fitting. The word came down late in Texas, but everybody now gets to share in it. So I think that's fitting. And it's a time to just reflect on where we are. And we are certainly not where we used to be. And what is it that we want to become? That's what it means to me.
It's always great to have a native Texan on a Juneteenth panel. All right, Jordy, what does Juneteenth mean to you?
Oh man, I hesitate to say anything beyond that. That was perfect. I'll say the only thing I'll say is, you know, for me, as a student of history and as somebody, yeah, I think it inched us closer to living and embodying the democratic ideals that we have long espoused but failed to meet. And it was a pivotal moment in getting us closer in that direction. So again, you know, kind of where I started tonight, where to me it means responsibility, especially as a white guy who's looking at this history critically and trying to see how we can teach it better to better our future. That for me, you know, I don't take Juneteenth off. That is the day that I continue to work, because I think that this work never, you can't pause for very long before you have to get back to it. And so that is what it means to me.
Thank you. Charde.
Sorry. Yeah, I think both Jordy and Ms. Miller hit it right, the nail right on the head. And to me, it also, I think Matt brought this up earlier, it's also an opportunity for reconciliation or to explore reconciliation further. So I think that's another interesting way of thinking about this idea of home and place. And reconciling, right, what that means in many of these spaces.
Bruce, what does Juneteenth mean to you?
I think it's a time to reflect and just think of what was and what could be, you know, and a time that we should enjoy our freedom. And it's not only a holiday for African Americans, it's an American holiday. It's a time for America to reflect.
Absolutely. Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. I've been on the board of the Orange County African American Historical Society for about 20 years. And for me, Juneteenth is wrapped up in my role there. And what is most exciting for me about Juneteenth is the connection, how communities have seemed to take Juneteenth and use it as a way to connect to the local culture and history of the local African American community, both in music, song, history, food, and really celebrate the local places and what some of that history is. And I think it's inspired a lot of places to show how important local history is to preserving and creating this national history that you're talking about, Bruce.
Absolutely. Matt, we're going to stay with you because we have a question from the chat from Emmanuel. Emmanuel is also a future panelist on one of our virtual programs on July 6th. And Emmanuel asked, Matt, welcome back. That's all caps. What's the house site or sites you hope to find in future archaeological work at Montpelier? What do you hope to find?
Thank you, Emmanuel. Good to see you in the audience, and looking forward to seeing you back at Montpelier. One that I am really, really excited about is one that we found through a metal detector survey up close to the house near the temple. And so if you all have been to Montpelier and you've seen where the horse graves are from the DuPont era, well, that is an area of a settlement of enslaved Americans from the 1820s. And to redefine that and remember that space through the archaeology and through the descendant community is one that would really begin to lay claim over that space in a way that reconciles so much of the history and removes some of the reclaiming that happened later or erasure that happened later.
Absolutely. Thank you. We have another question from the chat from Leontine. Leontine says, what do you think will happen with future generations regarding homecoming due to the fact of low church attendance and scattered neighborhoods? Will community groups like history, genealogical, and sororities and fraternities take on the responsibility of sharing about Juneteenth? What do you think, Bruce? I'm gonna push that to you.
Well, homecoming is different these days because they are dwindling the number of people that are coming back. They are losing connections. In other words, when the families move away, they will come back for a certain time, but over generations, they lose that connection. And that's the situation that we have today. And I guess the question of whether someone else or some other organization will take over, I'm really not sure. But I do believe that those, let's say, descendants that are still scattered, I feel that they will continue to come home as long as they are still around. But yes, the numbers are decreasing.
Terry.
If I may add briefly, at Carver, we have changed when homecoming actually is. We used to have a homecoming gathering in the fall like they would have in school, okay? But because we recognize that the alumni are aging, we have been able to reach out to their descendants as well and include them. And we moved the homecoming up to June. So this year it's going to be actually June the 25th on Saturday. All of you are invited. So it does take maybe a different kind of thinking these days and serious marketing and a different, more aggressive kind of research. And outreach. And we think that everybody wants outreach electronically. Our group wants outreach in the mail. They want to touch the paper. Okay. So we've had to rethink how we market. And so we're actually looking forward to really great day on the 25th with all different kinds of activities and an opportunity for them to share their stories. That actually is our theme.
Amazing. Thank you, Terry. We have another question for the chat from Sarah. Hey, Sarah, it's nice to see you. Sarah asks, she has two questions. What is one way that you would like to see history and memory preserved for coming generations? And then specifically to Matt and Charde, how in particular are you working to include memory in archaeology? Charde, you're nodding.
Well, first, I wanted to hear Matt's response, but I can definitely start. And I will say a lot of the work that I've been involved in and have been working alongside has really been driven by historical societies, churches, and cultural centers. And again, sort of combining sort of some of the work that we're doing, right, as archaeologists, where we do, again, have this tangible evidence, right, of these home spaces and these communities. It's an incredible opportunity, right, to continue kind of exploring this with those groups. One of the ways, actually, some of the folks that I've been working with have also been thinking about, right, how do we preserve this? I will say a lot of the folks that I work with tend to be retirees. So it's a very different type of memory that is being preserved, right? And one of the ways that we're thinking of how do we continue or begin really to engage younger generations, thinking about doing oral histories of the youth and all means of that word. And again, I think I saw a question about also K through 12, right? How are we actually getting the information that we're producing in all these various ways into K through 12 schools, I think is the next really big part of this, because as was said earlier, this isn't just African-American history, right? Juneteenth is not an African-American only holiday. This is American history, and it needs to be told in that matter. So we are doing things like exploring story maps through GIS. There's all these really cool, right, technologies now that we can use to either share this information or engage with folks as well. And again, I think that really is going to depend as well on what groups you are targeting. So for us trying to now engage more younger groups of people, that's really important. But as Ms. Miller had previously pointed out, right, that is not always going to be the best mechanism for a lot of the older folks who are really, really engaged in the trenches of this work. So again, I'm excited to hear from the panelists as well about what they've been doing to sort of bridge that divide, because it has been one that's been a bit difficult, especially in the age of COVID.
Yes.
Well, I want to, following you, Charde, I want to give a shout out to a staff member who's starting to do her dissertation work at Montpelier, Rebecca Davis, and she is interested in interviewing former DuPont workers who are Black, and a lot of these DuPont workers go back to the early 20th century, and the DuPont workers who are Black didn't come from out of the middle of just anywhere. They're from the local area and have a local connection. And one of my most favorite stories I've got with, connecting to a place is the temple. You think of the temple, the iconic temple of Montpelier, and older DuPont workers call the temple not the temple, but they call it the ice house. And there is no memory of that being an ice house. I mean, most visitors don't even know there's an ice house under that temple. And only the individuals who would know it as an ice house would be workers that either remember it, but also individuals who were here before the DuPonts who were using it as an ice house. And those would have been Black laborers who would have known how that ice house would have worked. So, this combination of the place names and oral history and descendants is a huge part. And sometimes, these memories, just like the names, don't have an immediate connection until you start to do the research. And then all of a sudden you see, oh, that is why people were walking in that area, or where this place name came from. And so there's some, you can go back 200 years, but those connections are there when you start looking at it. And that's the descendant research that's so important, and letting it take place not from the standpoint of mining descendants for information, but having descendants lead that research and direct us as, in this case, as archaeologists, as technicians to aid in that process.
Excellent, thank you. Because since we're running a little over time, I want to real quick ask this last question. The panel, Charde alluded to it a little bit, and get ready to close for the evening. Annie asks, how are you, or how do you envision involving K through 12 and post-secondary students and educators in preservation work and contextualizing of these narratives, oral history projects, and other work? So if anybody wants to talk more about working with K through 12 or secondary education students or educators.
I'll keep it short. Come on a dig.
My advice is, oh, sorry, Matt.
Oh, yeah, I'm done, Charde.
I was just gonna piggyback off of you and say specifically, because you have partnered with an incredible archaeologist, Dr. Alexandra Jones, Archaeology in the Community. I think I saw Tom on this call earlier. That is really who I look to when I'm thinking about this work, and thinking through how to do this work well, because Alex just makes it look so easy, and it is not. So I very much encourage folks to check out Archaeology in the Community's webpage.
One thing I do want to say real quick, a little plug for OCHS. We just ran a contest with the local Orange County High School students to redesign the organization's logo. And we are going to be presenting the winner and announcing them at our Juneteenth celebration on June 19th in downtown Orange. So even through these ways that we wouldn't necessarily think of, but what was really neat about that process was learning how these students who are in marketing classes and design classes, they had to figure out, how do you encapsulate African-American history, local history, what the organization is, what we're all about in a real quick, small image. And they're an amazingly creative and thoughtful group of young people put forth some really, really great work. I was lucky enough to be on the selection committee, as was Matt, and our fearless leader, Bruce, gets the final say over things. Thank you, and Matt and Tom, for putting the link for Archaeology in the Community in the chat. I want to ask one final question before we go, and it's going to be a one-word answer from everyone. And I'm going to ask you, in one word, why is place important? So the challenge is one word. So Terry, one word, why is place important?
Engagement.
Engagement, I love it. Matt?
Memory.
Memory. Jordy?
Groundedness.
Groundedness, I love it. Charde?
Family.
Thank you. And Bruce?
I agree, family.
Family. Well, I want to thank all of our amazing panelists for being here today. I think we had a really fantastic opportunity to dive into not only the history in Orange County and the experience of it as a place, but the region as well as across the state of Virginia today. This program is recorded, so we are going to be posting it online. So if you want to share it with anyone, please do. And please also join us again next week, same time, 6 p.m. On Wednesday evening. We are going to be doing our next program on June 15th, which is Juneteenth, the stories of homecoming. And in that program, we're going to be really focusing on oral history. Our panelists, Justin Reid, Nia Bates, and Hannah Scruggs, are all experts in oral history, in memory, and they are all from this part of Central Virginia. So they have a really amazing and unique perspective. And we got into a really great conversation the other day when we were in our practice session about the importance of homecomings and church homecomings in this part of Virginia. So I think that discussion will be picked up again next week. So I hope to see you all again. Tell your friends, join us every Wednesday all the way through July 6th. And come see us in person in downtown Orange on June 19th for our celebration. Thank you all.
Thank you for bringing us. Thank you, Mary, for bringing us all together.
Great
Happy
session.
Juneteenth.
Happy Juneteenth.